Welcome, everybody. I was talking to someone on email the other day, and he mentioned how he was looking for. Well, it was an elaborate conversation, but in the course of the conversation, he mentioned one of the things he was looking for was wholeness. And I told him this idea of wholeness, this idea of something that will complete what seems to be lacking, or complete what seems to be partial or confusing or somehow questionable, is sort of a big carrot on the string. I mean, wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't it be nice to find an answer? We've got all these questions. Life has all these questions. Wouldn't it be nice to find an answer? And so this wholeness, this completeness is like this ultimate carrot hanging on a string in front of us, which is imagine. What if we looked in exactly the opposite direction? What if we looked towards incompleteness, towards open-endedness, towards lack of integration? Our lives are... look at it. Our lives are these patchwork quilts that are sort of in a chaotic state of almost, or in some cases maybe more than almost, falling apart. We're sort of faking it to the day and trying this and working on that, and there's this. Wouldn't it be nice if everything sort of came together? There's this wonderful fantasy. If everything came together, if everything sort of resolved into a wholeness, and all of a sudden everything, like you could cross all the T's and dot all the I's, and yes, finished. But what if it's just the opposite? What if it's like, what if our lives are actually these sparkles in space? What if, you look at the night sky in a clear night, and there's just all these stars. Is it complete? Is it incomplete? Is it what? What can you do? Ancient people looked at the stars and they fantasized, these constellations and things, and looked into astrology, trying to find order in this, trying to find some sort of completeness, or trying to find the master pattern. What if there is no master pattern? What if it's just these speckles in infinity? Wouldn't that be something? Our quest would certainly be a lot simpler. It's easy to find incompleteness, here it is. It's easy to find question marks, here they are.
There might not be a master pattern, but there was a real sense that you found something at one point. That's something you...
For me?
Yeah, you've mentioned that.
Yes.
So a sense that you found something.
Yes, I found the reality of infinite openness, which can be semantically, you can say that's a kind of a completeness, but it doesn't look like completeness in human terms. It doesn't look like completeness in the sense of the last piece of the jigsaw puzzle, or something that pulls things into a static whole, that resolves answers. It's reality is findable. Reality is realizable. Okay, that's the good news. It's right here. It's much closer than you may think. It's absolutely accessible. There's nothing but reality present. And it's largely our making more of it than it is that obscures it from us. And this is the issue that I'm trying to talk about tonight. All these things we think we know about it, all of these templates we put up against it, it's this, it's that, it's the other. It's clarity, it's intelligence, it's consciousness, it's karma, it's the unfolding of the Big Bang, it's this, that, and the other. All these wonderful stories, they work to an extent. You can kind of sort of take them and hold them up and twist it, and they're kind of like, yeah, that's almost right, But what are you holding it up against? What is it we hold these stories up against? What is this? What is this here? It's always just this big I don't know. There's this big I don't know, and you hold up this theory, and yeah, that's pretty good, and you hold up that theory, and that's pretty good, but none of them are really it, because they're too complete, they're too pretty, they're too perfect, they're too resolved. What if reality is unresolved? What if reality is constantly falling apart? What if reality is a spontaneous decomposition?
And we're fucked.
Some people might take that nomenclature as a good thing. No, you're only fucked if you need it to be other than that. And if you need it to be other than that, you're a crazy person because you're swimming against the stream. Because if reality is a certain way and you need reality to be otherwise, that's sort of the definition of being nuts, I would say. Which is fine because most of us are.
Isn't any time where how do I say this? There's some distinction between having thoughts and having them help us function in our life and being preoccupied with thoughts. And what isn't that preoccupation itself a turning away from reality?
How can we know? It's a turning away, it's a turning towards. I mean, it is reality. And reality is doing that. It's occurring within reality. It's made of reality. So if we try to spin it as a turning away from or turning towards, from what viewpoint are we looking? On what platform are we standing?
I guess that's say that. Maybe not turning away, but that's when the idea of being fucked is happening, is when we're identifying with thinking. Rather than, can you say that one can identify with thinking rather than identify with reality? Even though thinking is part of reality?
Yeah, sure. I mean, any identification except with the whole, i.e. with the actuality is erroneous, or at least potentially confusing. If I just identify with my little left little pinky nail, and was completely oblivious to the rest of my body, my whole attitude and my behavior and my functioning might be pretty weird. And likewise, if we just identify with our thoughts, or identify with our social context, or identify with some arbitrary frame of reference, as opposed to the entirety of what we are, that also might be pretty weird. In the big picture.
What do you mean by the entirety of what we are?
That is a $64,000 question. Find out. It's right here. What are you right now? What's the entirety of what you are right now? It's right here. It's not inaccessible. It's not something mystical or far away or elusive. The entirety of what you are is this, right here, right now. What is it? Of course, you can't say what it is because language doesn't go into most of what. Language doesn't apply to most of what we are. But that's no necessary impediment. What we are is right here.
So when you said you had an experience of infinite space, that there can be also an identification with a sense of contraction or limitation in relationship to infinite space. And I know we've talked about this before, and there can also be periods of, wow, I'm really feeling infinite space. And when we're in that sense of relaxation and feeling that infinite space, we tend to think, oh, this is great, I got it. And then when we're in a state of limitation, we might think, well, this is all fucked. But you're saying that in both circumstances, you're not saying this, but in some ways, in both circumstances, reality is fully and completely here.
Yes.
But however, you did say that you...
Because contracted states are also infinite space.
So what was it when you say that you woke up to the nature of infinite space? What did you actually say?
It's irrelevant. Why talk about me? Let's talk about you.
Because I don't want to make everybody feel bad about themselves. No.
Not possible.
We don't need to talk about me. But
No, the point is, the only thing that matters to each of you is your condition, and hearing stories, hearing fables or narrations of someone else's supposed condition is meaningless and useless, you know.
Okay.
But you don't need to hear stories about other people, because what is going on with you right now? Look and see. What is this? You know, can you find any walls anywhere? Can anyone find a boundary? Okay, can you find a boundary? Where is your boundary?
The walls and the ceiling and the floor.
But what's that a boundary to?
It gives me a framework to operate in, so I'm not flying around in my head and scared.
Okay, all right.
It gives me a relative framework to deal with this on the ordinary level. Like knowing where the top is, knowing where everything is. But I'm not able to disassemble or deconstruct
Well, what do you do?
limits other than imagining.
What do you do when you're dreaming?
I don't know what I do really. A lot of times I don't have I'm not aware of dreams. But I'm probably fabricating stuff, or I don't know if it's but something's happening.
Right.
Imagination, I guess.
Okay. So functioning can happen, and frames of reference can present themselves without the frames of reference needing to be absolute. I mean, you could say this room is a frame of reference. It's useful. If you suddenly were given ultra high tech goggles that enabled you to see like an electron microscope, and you could see that this room was like galaxies dancing around, then that would be, oh wow. New time to shift gears, new frame of reference.
Right.
But you could adjust. You'd say, okay, this is the new frame of reference.
Right.
Galaxies dancing around. Cool. So this is the point. Is not that frames of reference aren't useful, in pragmatic terms, but that they're relative. And we have the capability. We have the inherent intelligence that can adjust and use these things to our convenience.
See, I assume everything you're saying is absolutely true, I believe, from what I've read and what I imagine. But it's not my experience. What I see as limits are limits. There's nothing other than that in terms of my ordinary way of operating, assuming. I'm assuming these are real walls, real limits, and there's nothing I can do to change it unless I had a microscope or something to prove differently.
Okay.
That's just some kind of the way I operate.
Well, that's cool. No problem.
So it seems intellectual to know that it isn't solid, because it's not the way I seem to operate or relate to things.
Well, then that's just a lot of nice ideas.
Maybe what he's saying is.
I don't know if this is absolutely true or not, but it's a way that I work with this is that my theory is that we wake up in our ideas first, and so we recognize a good idea. So when we hear Peter say something and it's still in the idea level, you go, okay, I like that idea, I believe that idea, and I'm going with it. And so to me, it sabotages us more to criticize ourselves for liking that idea. Because something in us, that innate intelligence that Peter is talking about, is carrying us forward. And so first, we're going, good idea. Let me hang out with that idea. And then later on, noticing might grow a little bit, to maybe emotional space or whatever else. But it might expand in other ways. So...
Sounds like you're saying believe it, though.
I'm saying like it for what it is. If you like the idea, it's guiding you somehow, and to kind of keep criticizing the idea might be holding you back from
It's
further.
not a criticism, and it's not a criticism. It's an observation of my experience.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with criticism.
It's just an offering.
Just reporting.
Was that an online question, or were you stretching, Dean?
He doesn't understand.
What?
Was that an online question, or were you stretching?
Oh, well, I could have been both. There is an online question that ties in a little bit to something that you said a while back, namely this. So I'm going to read the paragraph that actually doesn't complete, but I'm going to read the paragraph. You often say, here it is, look at it, and you will find that you are one with it. Please say, how does one look? By some technique of meditation? With what degree of concentration? I have looked pretty hard, but the matter of being one with trails off. But I think the gist is pretty obvious.
Huh? How do you look at that?
How does one look? How does one look?
Well, how do you not look? How do you not look at it? I mean, looking at, when I say this, I'm referring to our experience of being, okay? And we look at our experience of being by experiencing. But if we think we know what the experience is before we look, if we have a priori expectations, we're liable to only see those expectations and not go into the subtlety of what is actually here to be seen. So, how to look is to notice what our experience actually is as best we can, outside of the context of what we're used to thinking of it as being. In other words, okay, here I am, there's this big, call it bubble of experience. Okay, what is it? Well, I'm used to thinking, well, it's me sitting here in this body and I'm seeing and hearing and thinking and blah, 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 that's it. Okay, fine. Let me set that aside on the shelf over here. And now, what is it at that point? And wow, this is interesting. There's all of this present, call it energies, present in what? Present in experience, in sentience somehow. What is sentience? Well, that's really interesting too. What is sentience? What is perceiving? How is this being perceived? What's going on with that? So all of a sudden we're engaging with our experience on a more intimate level, perhaps, than a superficial level of thinking we know what we are, thinking we know what our experience is, even subliminally, which we typically may do just from numbness, from constant exposure and accepting of status quo. And one does this in a spirit of adventure, in a spirit of playfulness, and let it take you where it can, and once it's taken you somewhere, go farther. Let it take you farther, let it take you farther. And you'll discover there's no limits to how far it can take you. You'll discover there's no boundaries, there's no back to the cave. It looks like, your experience may look like a cave, and you go looking for the back and looking for the back and looking for the back, and lo and behold, you're in the night sky. So where's the back wall of the night sky? So that's one answer to that.
So you're saying the only technique for preparation would be to put aside all preconceptions and look the way a scientist would look, no preconceptions.
Yes, as best you can.
That's the meditation, that's the technique.
Yes, certainly. Our only real problems, our only real barriers are our preconceptions, our ideas of what things are. They're our only real limits.
These are all games that arise that you're sharing in order for us to experience with a sense of expansiveness. And yet, from the beginning point of what you mentioned to the exploration, to the apparent expansion, it all is what it is, never is nothing but what it is. And that seeing is just goes right through. And your exploration might work just the same in a different way. It sounds like an oxymoron, same in a different way.
No, absolutely, yeah. We're just our goal, if there is one, is to discover what's already the case. Which will happen to be very different than you expect it to be. Because reality cannot be expected, reality cannot be conceived of. And so our expectations are couched roughly in terms of concepts, and reality transcends those concepts. So what you find with a sincere and a fortunate exploration of reality will exceed your expectations, will guarantee to exceed your expectations, will be guaranteed to surprise you. In fact, what this actually is it can be said to be made of surprise.
Yeah.
Because it never repeats itself, and it never can be collapsed down to anything. So it's this constant. It's like mirage. It's like a mirage. You know, go looking for a mirage sometime. You're guaranteed to be surprised. The very act of looking for it is a surprising event. Do it again; it'll still be surprising.
Any idea of something outside of where we are is only a concept, an idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any idea whatsoever is obviously an idea. I mean,
so right now, things could never be other than what they are.
Well, we can't know that because you can't even say that they are what they are. I mean, that itself is an idea. It may be a powerful idea, but you know.
But ideas are just like, you know, little energy. They're just energy, and if we talk about ideas as if they're something,
right?
You know, they're just flashes of light like anything else, and
Mm-hmm.
they just open up and keep on going. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes we have the illusion of getting stuck in one, which is sort of hellish. But then, you know, if you're really in reality, they just come up and they do great things.
Yeah.
They're fun.
Sure.
And they vanish instantaneously.
They do. I mean, that's our true freedom, is that if you observe, nothing has any duration whatsoever, nothing persists. Any condition that is happening at this moment, in the next moment is already evolved or gone or is completely different.
Yeah.
So in what sense can anything
Right.
be entrapping if it doesn't persist?
Yeah.
It's like weather, you know. It's well, you know, how entrapping can a rainy day be? After a period of time, it's going to not be raining anymore. You know.
Well, what about the persistence of conditioning or vasanas? I mean, that's not.
But even that persistence isn't actual persistence. There's evolution there. There's change. You know, maybe on different scales of time, but nothing. You can't find anything static anywhere. I mean, if you look at your conditioning, if you look at the arc of your conditioning, say from the time you were 6 months old till the time you are now, you're going to find development. You know, you're going to find an arc. You're going to find trajectory. You're going to find evolution. You know, in ways, and this is real. So the fact of this evolution, the fact of this inconstancy, is an opportunity. It's a powerful argument. It's a powerful ingress into the fact that it's not really stuck. It's not as stuck as it may seem. It's not really permanent. It's not really the same. It may be similar. It may have interesting, challenging energies that we are engaged with.
There's tendencies to perceive what's new in habitual ways.
Yes, there is. Yeah. But even that evolves.
Yeah.
You know, the same old of today and the same old of 10 years ago is different if you look very closely. It may not feel like different. It may feel the same because feeling the same is one of its major aspects. But if you look at the actual details, it's not.
So again, the difference between fully new and fresh and original perception and perception that's has with it the baggage of conditioning.
Right.
What is the difference?
In actuality, there's absolutely no difference. But we have to notice that. We have to notice that. It's like watching reruns on TV. You know, you can watch the same episode of Gilligan's Island that you've seen 79 times. But 80th time you watch it, it's going to be new, it's going to be fresh, it's going to be different. There's going to be aspects of it you're not noticing. You may say, well, God, I know it. Well, now he's going to say this, and Mary Jane's going to say that. And so, you know, you can say that, but the actual experience of it has a freshness to it. Has
The
a
recognition of Bob Denver as being a great dramatic actor.
Right. Yeah. That's got to be a novelty, right?
Yeah, but when you say preconceived notions, I kind of like it makes it feel like the brain's fault. But I mean, a lot of our conditioning is like lodged in our body, and our mind's not even aware of it. You know, like tensions or whatever, knots, and so like I could say, oh, I'm looking, but then there's a lot of unconscious holding, you know, not just conditioning the brain, but holding the body and keeping me from actually seeing.
Maybe so. But that system itself is a dynamical system. That system itself has life and vitality and evolution and a give and a take to it, and an inherent and essential non-persistence. So at any instant, you might see through something that you hadn't seen through, you know, in ages or forever. You know, because the opportunity is always there, because freshness is always here. Freshness is always an opportunity. Even our greatest stuckness oscillates, it pulsates, it breathes. It's not like concrete where it just, you know, is completely inert. It's not like that. Nothing in our experience is actually like that. There is this vitality and this vibrancy and this dynamism, and that dynamism is our great opportunity because there's an ebb and a flow. You know, you might say there's tides. There's lucky days. There's good hair days and bad hair days. You know? And so so opportunity can present itself at any instant.
And we can see in spite of our conditioning.
Exactly so. Exactly.
And they just like the tension. They just like sit in there.
Yeah, because our conditioning isn't the entirety of our reality. Our conditioning is not the outer boundary of our being. Our conditioning may be a phenomena of the energy in our being, in our experience, but it's not the whole thing, and it's not even the central thing. And so even if there's this huge structure of conditioning over here, somewhere there's going to be a point over here that's not in that conditioning, right? And you can go there, right? And all of a sudden, wow, this is really interesting. I'm not in the conditioning. And so there you have the opportunity too. There's nothing but opportunity, you know. I mean, I suppose you all have noticed that there's this phrase, the open doorway, on the head of my website. And there's a reason for that, because everything whatsoever, experience whatsoever, is an open doorway. Nothing is actually solid, nothing is actually stuck, nothing is actually closed. Everything is like an open doorway you can go through into something else, into surprise, into novelty, into revelation. Anything. There's no such thing as a closed door. So even your conditioning, if you go into it, can be a revelation.
Here, oftentimes, well, in the past I have heard you say that one of the main problems with taking ideas, all the mental activity, is really not necessarily the thoughts, but simply believing the thoughts. And I found that very, very helpful, just reminding myself, wherever I get caught in that mental construct that I'm invested in and that I believe in, just wait a moment, just kind of, you know, take that belief away and see what remains. And it's just, I find it very freeing. Just whenever I observe my thoughts, to realize I don't have to buy them, I should not believe them, because most likely they're just fabrications. So
yeah. Thoughts are just like ads. Thoughts are exactly like ads. You see an ad on TV, and there's this inconceivably attractive looking person standing next to an inconceivably mundane looking product, and they're all done up, and it's like lit, you know, it's lit in like Technicolor, and everything is like, wow, that looks great, you know. God, I got to get me one of those, you know. But you look at it, and it's just colors, it's just light, you know. Or if it's on TV, it's sound and light. So you're seeing sound and light. You're not seeing an attractive person. You're not seeing a flashy product. You know, and our thoughts are the same way. as we have our thoughts, look at what the thoughts actually are, rather than a storyline that seems to be associated with them. Thoughts are these very bizarre energy events in your mind, in consciousness, that appear, and they're very, very trippy. They're very, very interesting. You know, I mean, right now we're all thinking. Thoughts are appearing in our minds, right? Look at what's actually happening. When I say I'm thinking, what am I actually referring to? What am I actually pointing at by saying I'm thinking? You know, it's very interesting. It's like looking at the Northern Lights or something. You know, it's this very familiar and intimate but completely otherworldly event that's constantly present in our consciousness.
Changing.
Yeah. And that's what thought is. Thought is this inconceivable transcendental energy presence. And you know, the story of, oh, you know, this means this and that means that, and my life sucks, and I want this and I don't want that, and all that is where is that in this Northern Lights show? Where is it? You can't find it. It's not really there. Yeah.
So when we hold on to a thought, we have a thought and we think it's a prized thought or an important thought to communicate with somebody, it's all kind of a joke. Just opening your mouth and expressing anything is kind of a joke.
Yeah, in a way it is. That's not to say it's
nonsense. There's nothing going on.
Right. That's not to say it's not a viable mode of functioning, because having thoughts and expressing thoughts is a viable way of you being what you are, of you being the energy system that you are. It's one of the aspects of your functioning to do that, perhaps. But if you look at it, if you look in detail at what's actually happening is vastly different than you think is happening. When you say a thought, what's really happening is an embodiment of your motivation for saying it, and which includes the supposed cause, includes the intended effect. So the actuality of the system of saying the thought may be much more vast and subtle and complex than your conscious version of saying the thought. For example, I mean, it's very superficial spinning of that might be, you might come up to someone and tell them that their shoes are untied, and you think, well, gee, I just noticed that, and I'm just being a nice guy. But maybe you want their attention. Maybe you want them to like you. Maybe you want to prove that you're a caring person in some sense. You know, so and this is obviously just a very simplistic story, but it illustrates that any event includes much more than appears on the surface of it in terms of how it happens. Everything we do is a full and total expression of the energy system we are in all sorts of oblique ways. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with talking, with thinking. And yet if you look at what these phenomena actually are, what's actually going on, it's like your electron microscope when you look at these walls. It's wow, there's a whole lot more going on here than we're used to thinking is. We have very simplistic versions of what our functioning consists of, but behind the scenes there's all of this elaborate machinery and set changing and implication and cause and effect and involvement that is not necessarily readily available.
But in order to function as what sounds like a healthy human being on the relative level, in objective reality, it seems like there's an assumption that you have to be kind of ignorant and stupid relative to all that stuff that's going on behind it. In other words, you have to keep your eye...
That may be the case, looking around the world.
I mean, you have to be kind of on the ball in front, playing the game of what we're playing that's relative and agreed on, rather than being aware and conscious. If you gave more weight to everything that's supposedly real behind you, you wouldn't be really playing the game very...
Not necessarily.
You wouldn't argue your point. You
not necessarily. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive.
No.
I mean, that's a supposition. Maybe not. Maybe on the contrary, if you had a more encyclopedic awareness of your actual energy function, you'd be able to play the game even better.
That'd be nice.
Where do you sign up, right?
Peter, do you ever something is the way our life is evolving moment to moment?
No, I think in terms of moment existence, there's no two moment. It's just moment.
Okay.
And what happens in the moment is absolutely indescribable. And moment to moment is a much more elaborate, on the one hand, and also much more oversimplified version of what's actually happening. If you look at your actual experience, there's only the moment. There's no to moment. There's no other moment. And yet what happens in the moment is absolutely indescribable. Somehow the moment manages to be different in itself on an ongoing basis, which is completely inconceivable, but it's all of our common sense everyday experience.
Well, I kind of mean that. So in some ways, although not in a narrow sense, but you're talking about mindfulness, not in the Buddhist sense, but in a more wiser way.
Well, mindfulness just means being. I mean, being arguably exists in mind and consists of mind. So being is mindful. I mean, mindfulness could be said to be the engine of being, or the machinery of being.
So in a moment when unmindfulness or distraction is not happening, then which is, I think, the case for many of us here, or for myself, most of the time, then there's a sense of, frustration or disconnection and thoughts like, oh, I'll go see Peter Brown and I'll get back on track.
Boy, you're barking up the wrong tree. But even that unmindfulness is obviously a functioning of the inherent mindfulness, or how could it appear? So it's a misunderstanding to think of it as unmindfulness.
Okay,
to think of it as the opposite.
So what about?
I'm not suggesting we rename it. I'm suggesting we reinvestigate what is actually going on.
Okay, so there's a. Okay,
it's like, in other words, if you say, "Boy, my finger really hurts. Boy, my finger really hurts. Boy, my finger really hurts. There's a thorn in my finger. Boy, my finger really hurts." It might be. Well, yeah, my finger really hurts as a message to get the thorn out of my damn finger. So rather than worrying about the finger hurting, maybe I should be removing the thorn. So in other words, rather than worrying about the lack of mindfulness or the presence of unmindfulness or whatever,
right.
Maybe that is a symptom that is like a chute that's steering a herd of cows into the slaughterhouse. It's like it's pointing you towards banging your head against the wall to make you recognize something.
And there's definitely some banging going on there. So I mean, there's absolutely nothing that's excluded.
Of course not. What could it be? What could be excluded from what?
But some people are happy.
They are?
Some people are not.
But that sounds like a fantasy to me. It sounds like the ultimate fantasy. Some people are happy out there. I read it once in a book. I saw it in a movie. It said they lived happily ever after. So look, that's the proof.
I'm actually thinking of you.
What makes you think I'm happy? Maybe I'm stupid, going around with this shit and grin on my face. But there's happy and there's happy, True happiness may not be what we think of simplistically as happiness. True happiness might be seeing that this crazy roller coaster of experience is what is, and it's a glorious thing. Which doesn't mean that there aren't peaks and dips. True happiness might not be a steady state sort of shit-eating grin on your face. It might be a kind of a letting go of wanting it to be that. And maybe that letting go feels so good that that's a whole deeper kind of happiness than the simplistic happiness of being on the peaks all the time. And again, I really caution you, look at your own condition. Don't, having models of what seems to be happening to other people is worse than useless, because what good does that do you? Even if everyone in the world was happy and you weren't.
Well, it makes me feel worse.
Exactly. Oh, well, okay, there's a good plus there, see? Okay.
It helps me.
You get a lot of mileage out of it. There you go. It's good. It's good to have those things on call when you need them.
Yeah.
You never know when you're going to need a good jolt of coming down on yourself.
judgment,
Yeah, of course.
and there's nothing to value.
Of course, yeah. Of course.
I'll second that.
So there.
Absolutely. Well put. But seeing there's nothing to value, admittedly might be said to be a big load off.
Which might bring about some happiness.
From time to time. When your wife isn't yelling at you.
But when you had that enlightenment experience, I'm not sure if you used that term, but like around 73 or something like that, right?
Yes.
And you've actually come down from there too?
No.
No, that's what I thought. It doesn't look like you have come down very much
Well,
from there.
there's no down from there to come.
Okay. And there's no further up from there to go either.
No.
Yeah.
Is there some degree of kind of maturing in your realization, sort of, how would I put it, maturing may not be the right word, but...
There's an eternal unfolding that never stops, and it's the very nature of the universe that there should be some... What we call the flow of time is this eternal unfolding. And we all experience it, and we all experience it as maturing, and we all experience it as a deepening, we all experience it as going more subtle. And this applies to consciousness. It's like this is the nature of the constant, unstoppable unfolding of consciousness. And if you're so-called realized or so-called unrealized, it's the same phenomenon. So it's, I mean, realization doesn't change anything. Realization is just seeing what is the case. It doesn't change what's the case. It doesn't add anything to it or take anything away. You just all of a sudden see what this is, and has always has been and always will be. So nothing's actually changed or augmented. You know, I mean, there's this vast misunderstanding of spirituality and this notion of enlightenment with a capital E and all this stuff. Everything is what it is, and what that is, it will always be, and it's not going to be. It can't be made better, and it can't be made worse. And the most you can do with it is recognize it or not recognize it.
And all of these expectations of how it should be, how it is. I mean, we have all of that spiritual, especially some years back, all of these fantastic descriptions of enlightenment and the powers that you acquire and the states of being that go with it, that somehow, you know, they did a great disservice because you go on looking, spend years and years for that, when in fact it's the ordinariness of this moment, as stupid and ordinary and whatever it is, that is it. And just accepting that is a big deal, and it's hard, especially when you have been fed all that stuff. You know, it's just such a huge event that should be pumped us or whatever.
Yeah, that's a big factor. But and all of that, there's of course a subtlety to it. You know, many of these fantastic stories are actually true. Because to say that this ordinary, just this moment is true, but the ordinary moment of this being of this moment is completely unordinary. It's completely miraculous. It's completely astounding, and includes just vast depths of subtle phenomena that are readily perceivable if you open your eyes and look. And so, if you hit on that side of the story, wow, this sounds fantastic. But it can be, as you say, it can be misleading, because that's, even though that's true, that's not necessarily the short route to get there. It's not necessarily practical.
And sometimes accepting ordinariness and just wherever it is, boringness of it, is the doorway to that magicness of it, to that, you know, just wow. It's just...
Yes, ultimately acceptance of what is the whole point. But acceptance of what isn't something you can create or aspire to. That's worse than useless. When you see what it is, then accepting or not accepting becomes moot. So that's why I try and put the emphasis on seeing rather than accepting. Because accepting, again, can be a trap that you're like, oh, I've got to accept this. Let me try to accept this. Okay, I'm really working to accept this. God damn it. As opposed to just like, oh, interesting. Very strange. Very, very strange. Stranger and stranger.
So,
who knows the chai?
so, I mean, it's impossible to disagree with anything that you're saying.
Oh, it's not
Or-
nice. I should run for office.
But I'll give it a try. No, no, I'm serious. Or what? I forget your name. Zlatko. But to be mundane, the issue of trauma, like that, this woman who was just discovered, who is living in tents. But anyway, so many of us live with trauma and wound, and as Freya says, much of it is in the body, and there seems to be in a difficulty, at least, to see the ordinariness, to be liberated by the ordinariness, because there's a kind of, and often traumas perpetuate themselves because of the way perception keeps, looking for reaffirmation or something.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I don't have a specific
this
question.
but this points to the mystery of karma, and which is very paradoxical, because on the one hand, none of our circumstances are actually an impediment. You could have the most horrific trauma in the world and just be a basket case, and yet at any instant you can see beyond it, or not. And yet the or not may tend to predominate for most people, which is the mystery of karma. Even though our parents' stories about what's happening to us aren't really true, they're true. And if that doesn't make any sense, that's why I'm calling it a mystery. The whole thing is very strange. The whole thing is extremely strange. But the good news is, nothing is actually an absolute impediment. So no matter how traumatized you aren't actually stuck in that trauma. Even if you may have been stuck in that trauma all your life, the next instant you might not be. And that applies every instant. Because you're not actually in the trauma. The trauma is in you, and it's actually not the biggest part of you. So there's parts of you that are not in the trauma. And at any instant you might turn your head and notice that. It's like, oh wow, look, I'm looking over here, and well, the trauma's here for sure, but what's over there? We're bigger. We're bigger than our trauma. We're bigger than our history. We're bigger than our psychology. We're bigger than our personality. So our personalities may have been squashed and just completely butchered. But that's not all of us. We're not just our personality.
Well, that's why I said the moment to moment, because in a moment, it's as simple as a breath.
Yeah, exactly so.
But that there is, whether you call it habitual mind or karma, often returns to overwhelm. The moments seem, there doesn't seem a continuity of that freedom from the trauma. There seems more of a continuity of the conditioning broken up by moments of freedom.
That may be so, but it doesn't inherently have to be so. So again, the whole thing is very paradoxical and mysterious. But the good news is that it doesn't have to be so. There's always opportunity. It's always opportunity. We're never actually stuck, no matter how stuck we seem to be.
But is it will? It sounds like it's luck or karma or grace that you would see things as they are. It doesn't sound like it
any of those words apply.
But intention or will doesn't have anything to do with it, does it?
But intention or will could be said to be grace. Where
That
does it
could
come
be luck
from?
too. But I mean, ultimately, that's luck if you have the intention.
Of course. Where does it come from?
So it all comes from something other than I.
Yes. everything comes from something other
So
than
it's
I.
all just luck again. It's grace or
Yeah,
good
it's luck,
fortune.
it's grace,
But
it's
there's
good
no
fortune,
one,
it's the will of
no
God.
one responsible, no one doing it.
Right.
So it takes
And yet what you are is what's doing it. And to say it's no one is true, but that doesn't mean it's non-existent. It exists as it exists, and it is what it is, but it's not what you think you are.
And if somebody is just...
And you are it.
Right.
You've always been it.
If somebody's just screwing up and being totally disassociated and ignorant of what you're saying, there's no one to blame. And yet, that may be karmic conditions so that grace or whatever it is that knocks you into seeing doesn't happen. Because it's just repetitious of resistance. And yet resistance or stubbornness or defensiveness or arrogance is just as holy and enlightened as being bright and intelligent.
Yes. Yes.
Only we don't feel it.
Right.
We don't feel the benefits.
Yes. Well, we do feel the benefits, we just don't feel that we're feeling the benefits.
Somebody else is feeling the benefits.
But isn't one of the, it seems to me, one of the big impediments for realizing is looking for the realization.
Of course. Because we have an idea that realization is something, and that preconception is a carrot on a string, and we're looking for the carrot, and we're not looking. It's just I want a carrot. Where's the carrot? You know, absolutely. Yeah.
So, taking that to what might be a logical conclusion, might be completely illogical. Should we not be coming here? Because
I don't
this
care.
is encouraging us to look.
Well, it might or might not be. Again, that's an individual. Hopefully, I'm not encouraging anyone to do anything. I hope I'm doing enough random sort of scattershot, contradicting myself that that no one's going to fall into thinking I'm saying anything in particular.
It's the child.
But no, it's a very good point. Absolutely. The point is to stop searching. The point is to be self-sufficient. The point is to see your being as it is, which you don't need any help to do. And yet, discovering that you don't need any help may look like looking for help sometimes, or not. Doesn't need to.
And we don't come because we're looking or seeking. We come for the feast.
Yeah. I come for the chime, I guess. I guess you all know that.
But there's, for me, you gave me a push. I wasn't going anywhere else.
Okay, well, see, that answers your question there. So, in other words, random acts of meaningless viciousness can happen in your
And, yes.
And or not.
Well, no. But it's more likely to happen around someone who has realized than by hanging out in Sainsbury's.
Well, that's. I mean, that argument is frequently made. You probably have to prove it. But I don't know. What does more likely mean? Since it's always a one-off, can the argument more likely be meaningfully made? Maybe someone is going to find it. Maybe someone is going to find it. Getting hit with a rolling pin by their irate wife. Maybe or hanging out with holy men, or shooting up junk, or whatever. Who knows? I mean, it's always a one-off, so you can't really compare it. Can't say what's the last straw. You only know the last straw after it's hit.
What is a one-off?
Sorry?
What is a one-off?
It means something that it happens only once and doesn't repeat. It's used in manufacturing to refer to something that's custom made. Like if I tailored you a suit, it would look terrible. But if I knew how to tailor and tailored you a suit just for you once, it would be a one-off.
One of a kind.
One of a kind, you could say. Yeah.
There's this. It's kind of trendy, this thing they call and it's related to karma, the law of attraction. You know, and I guess I'm thinking like if we're attracting circumstances that beat us down, or we're attracting, you know, I guess that's karma. Well, do you know what I'm referring to? Can you say something to, just like, you know, maybe being awake or is attracting? Well, you can talk better about it than I can.
Maybe, maybe not. I mean, you know, the whole idea of attracting begs the question of what's attracting and where does it come from? If you say, oh, I'm attracting bad luck and I'm going to start attracting good luck, how is that going to happen? Where's the ability to attract good luck going to come from? Where's the ability to attract openness going to come from? So, again, it ultimately devolves to what you might call luck. I mean, that itself is going to be karma. You know, just to sort of to boil it down to some kind of supposed formula or some kind of supposed laws, it's fine, but who's going to enact them? How are you going to get the wherewithal to pull the trigger? You know, I mean, in other words, it's begging the question of, it's passing the buck on what's actually happening to a mechanism of a supposed description of a mechanism of what's happening, and what is actually doing the mechanism, what's making it happen. So it's like you say, okay, I'm going to realize what's going on here now. I'm going to just get clarity and open up and see it. It's like, okay, great. How are you going to do it? Where's the wherewithal to do that going to come from? Well, either it comes or it doesn't, right? Can you like reach in the bucket and find it and pick it up? Can you make that happen? And even if you could, what would be making you make that happen? You know? So ultimately, what's doing anything devolves to mystery, devolves to the unknown. How does anything happen? I'll be damned if I know. You know, I mean, calling it the will of God or calling it luck is as good a description as anything. But if you look very closely, I think you'll find that that's always the case. So generating elaborate sort of methodologies and descriptions of mechanisms is fine, but you only have the wherewithal to work them if you have the wherewithal to work them.
So really, you said the real mechanism is genuine seeing.
Yes.
Yes.
And where does that come from?
Well, it just is.
Yeah, it is. It's nature of reality. Reality sees itself. Reality is always seeing itself. That's the only thing that's ever happening. And yet, how does reality realize it's seeing itself? I don't know.
But if reality isn't seeing itself, or it's only seeing itself in a limited way, then there's repercussions of that in terms of the unfolding of.
There may or may not be. That's more elaborate theory. You can't know if that's actually true. I mean,
suffering is happening.
Right. Sure. Yeah. One of the modes of reality seeing itself is suffering. One of the modes of reality seeing itself is confusion. Certainly. But it's always reality seeing itself. And if you see that, even if it's suffering and confusion, that's the finish line. It's not about ceasing suffering or ceasing confusion. It's about seeing what suffering is, seeing what confusion is.
So if you're not at the end of the finish line, then you're not. That's a message that you're not. That you're seeing isn't. Seeing isn't actually is happening only in a limited way.
Yes, you could say that. Although seeing never happens in a limited way. Seeing is always absolute, but that's very paradoxical and confusing, so don't worry about it. I just said it because it's true.
So you're either awake or deluded.
Yes, and deluded paradoxically is awake. But you don't know that until you're awake.
Well, it seems deluded is really deluded.
Sure.
It's just not seeing.
Yeah. But the not seeing is not actually a different condition than seeing. It's actually exactly the same thing actually happening.
But you don't have the experience of freedom or ease or something. It's just that normal feeling of suffering.
Yeah, maybe. You might say that. But it's the whole thing. But trying to model it, the point, don't try to model. I recommend don't try to model the conditions of confusion. Don't try to model the conditions of suffering. just go to seeing beyond them. You know, you don't need to revisit your jail. Just notice that the door is standing open. You poke your head out and look around. You don't need to understand confusion, and just see the light.
And it will be confusing.
Sorry?
And it will be confusing.
That's for damn sure.
I have a question. I've heard you mention that reality is self-verifying.
Yes.
And my question is, is it self-verifying in the unfoldment process, or when you become awakened?
Both. When unfoldment is happening, you know it's happening, and you know it's happening because that self-verifying quality is becoming apparent. Right? When unfoldment's happening, you're not questioning whether or not it's happening. You know it. It's like, wow, something's really happening here. This is the real thing. You know? And that is the self-verifying aspect. Because it's not something it's not conceptual. It's not a game you're playing. It's an energy wave that actually exists that you're surfing, feeling.
Have you ever found one piece of advice where you give to someone or nugget of wisdom who's a deluded individual, just sort of beginning to do some spiritual exploration and sort of just starting to question the reality of the world as it appears to most of us?
I would say notice that your experience is subtler and richer than you're used to thinking of it, and go to those subtle and rich places and places that are off the map or places that are at the edge of the map that you're not used to going to, and try and see what's there. And let it show you what it is.
Through any particular vehicle?
Yes, through any particular vehicle.
What are your thoughts on meditation?
Meditation is fine if you're doing it right, and the right way to meditate is to discover that you don't need to meditate.
Okay.
The right way to meditate is to discover what meditation is, which is exactly what this is.
Gotcha.
So again, you need to bring playfulness and subtlety and exploration and a healthy irreverence to all of these things, and rather than just be dull and gullible and yes, now I'm meditating, I'm going to meditate for the next 30 years or so.
That's kind of what I have to force myself to do.
Yeah. But it's like, well, if the thought comes up, why am I doing this? It's like, good question. Why are you doing it? Well, where does that go? In other words, don't be credulous, don't be gullible, don't be dull. Be smart. Be intelligent. You have intelligence on call. You have vastly more intelligence than you've ever been aware of on call, because in the background is this inconceivable intelligence that we all inherently are. And this intelligence is actually what is leading you on the spiritual quest. And so it will manifest itself, it will direct you on it. And if you let it and let yourself be more intelligent than you're capable of being, you'll find that you are. And you'll have insight, and you'll have genius, and you'll have inspiration, and these things will all serve you well.
Wonderful.
Yeah? Sounds good, doesn't it?
It sounds fabulous.
My pep talk.
Yeah.
I haven't told you the bad side.
I was just telling Dave, I feel like I've dropped into an advanced spirituality class. I'm trying to take it all. It's wonderful, thank you.
In the form of meditation, though, sitting, you could bring at times, you're not bringing it, but just by sitting, moments of true curiosity and freshness can happen, even though you're forming, I'm watching the breath, I'm noting, I'm doing this. I think for me, I need some structure like that, even though it's certainly not meditation most of the time. But just putting in the time of stopping myself from my normal running around doing routines, and I think it helps me have moments of ease and quiet, or getting out of the mind that I don't seem to get so easily.
If that works for you, then that's great, and if that's where your genius is leading you, then that's super. But just the only thing I would recommend is don't think of that as a final destination. Think of that as as a journey you're going through that's going somewhere else.
Yeah, it
And let it
doesn't end.
unfold into newness. Let it
It
unfold
doesn't
into
end
something
after
else.
45 minutes or
Right.
something.
Yeah.
Waiting for it to end. It
Yeah.
doesn't end. It might just begin.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. I mean, open-endedness is a good mantra.
Yeah. How would anybody know that they were deluded, confused, or ignorant if there wasn't some innate standard that we were kind of measuring against in some way? I mean, to be deluded is we would have to know what it means not to be deluded. There would have to be something to measure it against.
Well, creating that something to measure it against is what makes delusion. Delusion imagines difference. Delusion imagines there's this condition and there's that condition.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting.
In reality, there's no delusion. And when you see that, then you're not deluded. Whatever state of mind seems to be presenting itself at the time. But if you exist in a world where there's delusion and non-delusion, then you're deluded. because you're creating relative things that are different in each other where there's none. In reality, you can't find anything that's specific that's different from anything else. There's infinite difference. If you look at your field of experience, like say your field of vision right now, every single point of light that's presenting itself in your field of vision is different than every other point of light that's presenting itself. And in the next instant, each point of light is different than itself than it was in the last instant. So there's infinite difference, but you can't find any, you can't say, yeah, but there's this and there's that, because you look at the this and it breaks down into just openness, and you look at the that and it breaks down to openness, and how can you say they're different? Because they're both just open-ended, constant change.
I don't know if he was talking about meditation or not, but Satchel Paige once said, sometimes I sits and thinks, and sometimes I just sits.
Me too.
So
sometimes I sit and thinks, and sometimes I sit and drinks.
So, that just sitting there, that seems to be a lot like what advanced students of meditation would call real meditation.
Well, an advanced student of meditation will call everything meditation, or nothing meditation.
Yeah.
Because there's no such thing as meditation versus non-meditation. All that there ever is just this.
Yeah.
And is this meditation? Is it not meditation?
Who knows?
You know, anyone that can pin down what this is wins the Nobel Prize in heaven.
Have to wait to get it.
Well, this happens to be heaven, so maybe you know. Or is it hell? I can never remember.
Yeah. One of the two.
Or both.
Yeah.
Peter, could you say whether seeing is more seeing when it's more of a 360-degree location as opposed to
Right, I understand.
that being different?
Right. Well, at certain points in your unfoldment, the answer is yes. Ultimately, the answer is no. But the answer, depending on where you are, the answer may be yes, and that's for you to explore. I mean, at first, you might say, in the course of unfoldment, there's sort of a tunnel vision, and there's a gradual revelation of more and more, and then there's a revelation of the full field, and then as that revelation, as the unfoldment progresses, you notice that the full field actually isn't a full field, and any aspect of it that shows up whatsoever is the full field. So at that point, tunnel vision is the full field, this tunnel vision is the full field. And you've gone through openness into discovering that everything is openness, at which point even closed downness and contraction is openness. But to just jump to that last, if it's not true for you, would be a disservice. So it depends on where you are. And that you have to trust your intuition to explore. But if you're used to sort of degrees of tunnel vision, degrees of fixation or frames of reference, and you start discovering a more panoramic view, then that's good seeing. That's good noticing. But that's not the end. Keep going. Notice more.
Or don't try to stay in that.
Right. Don't try and stay anywhere. The only place we're staying is the place you can't get out of.
The only place words stay?
Yeah. I said it, so it must be true. But I'm a liar. I'm a known liar, so I'm taking your chances.
Well, you use the word lie a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Lie actually, I thought, refers more to an intention to deceive.
Yeah. I know that.
So the purpose of the intention would be is differentiation of what kind of lie it is.
Yeah, but from what perspective can you differentiate what kind of lie it is? Until it's too late.
It's never too late.
Never too late. Okay, good answer. No, the point is that truth cannot be told. So if you come to a talk like this, you're going to be being told lies. And they're going to be ignorant lies in most cases if it's someone who believes what they're telling you is true, which is hell. Or it's going to be deliberate lies in the case of someone that knows what they're saying is untrue, in which case they hopefully will be able to imbue the lies with a certain amount of artifice and intelligence that may prove to be useful in some oblique way.
For a deliberate purpose.
Or not. Maybe it's just an elaborate practical joke. Who can say?
Oh, no.
And to even know the difference between those two might require a high degree of unfoldment, if there is one.
Maybe it's a clever scheme to get more chai.
I like this theory. So far it's working. Just a half, thanks so much. See?
Pierre, when you're saying something that you know is not true, to be even more precise or completely honest, maybe what I think you're saying is you're trying to express inexpressible that cannot be put into words. So you're saying it knowing full well that the words are going to be inadequate and they're not going to do the job, and therefore it is lie.
Yeah.
But you're not. Okay, just clarification. So, like Irma was saying, there is no intention to lie. It's just, or to deceive or misrepresent reality. It's just you're trying to do something that's impossible to capture it in words, and knowing that you're, as a caveat, you're putting it out and saying, well, it's a lie because it doesn't capture, what's going on.
You can write my publicity for now. You're a good apologist. When he says this, what he really means is, he says he's a blatant liar, what he really means is...
No, he's not a liar. But within that, you could actually tell lies.
I always tell lies.
That's what I mean.
I've never said a true word in my life.
You can consciously intend to tell a lie.
Yeah,
just for the effect of throwing it out there.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Right.
But all human language is lies. We're all liars. And the more honestly and intelligently we confront that fact, the more artfully we can do it. We use language as part of the dynamics and metabolism of our functioning with other humans, i.e. to get things from them, to get people to do what we want, to get things from people, to give things to people so for our benefit, and all of this. We're all basically self-serving, survival-oriented energy systems, and we have a certain inherent facility at that and functionality, and our use of language and semantics is a big part of that. So we're all, to spin it one way, we're all very self-oriented, deliberately manipulative liars, which sounds harsh, but in a sense it's profoundly true. And it's not, and once you see that that's the truth, isn't a bad thing, or even a good thing, it's just a thing. And you see that that's how it works, and then okay, cool. Then you can see it more intelligently, and do it with greater skill and with greater effectiveness.
There's an intention there to communicate a consciousness that is just solely a singularity.
Yes.
That
Singularity, that's a good word. Singularity. I like it. Singularity.
that in no way you know whether it can anyway be understood by another consciousness, and there's this constant attempt to try to communicate where and who you are.
But actually it's simpler than that, because there aren't any other consciousnesses.
But what about aloneness?
There aren't any other consciousnesses, so the consciousness it is completely alone.
Come again?
There aren't any other consciousnesses, so the consciousness that is completely alone. And you are that consciousness.
If there is no aloneness, because there is no other.
Right. Yeah, aloneness only becomes meaningful. Well, there's no loneliness. There's aloneness, but there's no loneliness. Because loneliness would only be possible in the absence of togetherness, and togetherness is an impossibility because there's no other to be together with. And even aloneness can't be said to obtain because of the inherent incompleteness of things. There would have to be a unity for it to be alone, and since there is not a unity, you might say, God, maybe reality is a fraction. Probably, I should say certainly an irrational fraction too. You mathematicians in the room.
So if there's no other consciousnesses, what are all those apparent other consciousnesses?
You.
Yeah.
Like when you dream at night. You might dream you're in Times Square and there's 10,000 people around you celebrating New Year's Eve, and you wake up and you think, how many people were there? How many consciousnesses were there? One. And it wasn't even you in the dream, it was the dreaming consciousness.
So you think this consciousness is fairly similar to the dreaming consciousness, or identical?
Identical. And you're it.
Whoa. So you're it too?
You may say that.
I did say that. And you're at 3, you're at 4.
Doesn't really work that way. All you need to worry about is that you're it.
So with being it and being aloneness true,
yes.
Aloneness is true. Is there any reality to the word love? Is love a real thing
Yes,
that
certainly.
happens with aloneness?
Certainly. Love is the very nature of that aloneness.
Even though there's no object.
Right.
There's no outside thing to love.
Right, but the outside thing is the one being itself, and it loves itself.
So
In the same sense that when you have a dream at night, that dream is an expression of your love for yourself, an expression of your love for your own values. You manifest those values as apparent objectivity for your own meaningfulness, and that's profound love, that your uniqueness loves itself and loves its values, and so it manifests them as other, and this is exactly what happens in our waking life as well.
But it's not necessarily a feeling or an emotion. Is there anything way you could describe it, what it would be, love? Is there anything to it? If it's not emotion, it's not emotion and sensation.
You're trying to differentiate qualities where there's no differentiation. In actuality, we differentiate these things. We say love and hate and emotion and thought and neutral experience as if they were different from each other. And actually they're all aspects of one thing. They're aspects of the same thing. So this differentiation, so you're saying, what is love actually? Well, love actually goes to this.
This is love.
Which is exactly, when you say, what is hate actually? It goes to this. What is ignorance actually? It goes to this. What is clarity actually? It goes to this. Because what this is not differentiable into these separate qualities. And we differentiate, as human beings in our psychology and our simplistic understanding of what we are, we differentiate these things and have a very elaborate, soap opera using these elements that we've differentiated out. But we're not really understanding them primordially as they actually are. But exactly like we do in a dream. In a dream, the dreamer contains everything that it can show up in the dream. And in the dream you can have problems and demons chasing you, and you can have love, and you can have friends, and you can have enemies, and you can have confusion, and all these qualities that show up as if they're different, but actually they obviously are nowhere else than in the dream of consciousness, or else where else could they have come from? So again, we see an example of this, that all of these qualities that seem to be so differentiated are inherent in the one thing as its nature, and yet it can effortlessly spin off these things that seemingly so diversified, because that's its ability to do so, its magic powers. I should make a few announcements. We're going to be winding up in a few minutes. This is going to be the last meeting at Leif's. The next public satsang is going to be at the Hillside Club, I believe the first Wednesday of next month, which I believe is the 7th. You can find all the details on my website as always, so please check there before attending. And I'm sure we'll all join together in a warm vote of thanks to Leif for generously providing the use of his house for our ramshackle meeting. And please don't forget a $5 contribution, which is greatly appreciated, as a partial and meager recompense to Leif for this most generous gesture on his part.
So there's also that afternoon long. What is that?
That's right. On Saturday the 3rd, there's a half day, which is also on the website, from noon till 4-ish or something, which is going to be at Nancy's. And there's a map on the website and details on the website. It will be a potluck lunch. So please, if you come, please bring a lunch or a dish or a snack or a dessert or a fine wine. Champagne is preferred. Only good European, please. That's acceptable. And space for the